The decade that froze Britain. 4 of the coldest winters of the 20th century happened within a single decade, the 1970s. 1970, 1976, 77, 1978 to 79. Each one brought the kind of cold that didn't just shut down schools, it froze Britain in place. Snowdrifts that swallowed cars, motorways turned to white deserts, rivers solid enough to walk on in places. In some towns, people even burned furniture when the coal ran out. It wasn't one freak storm or a single bad year. It was a pattern. A stretch of winters that made the long freeze feel like a season all its own. The kind of cold that crept indoors into pipes and breath and morning routines. The kind that people who lived through it still talk about now, half proudly, half wearily. So what was it about that decade? Why did the 1970s bite so hard? Harder than anything since? Was it the weather itself, shifting in ways we barely understood, or a country too stretched and unprepared to handle it? Maybe both. Either way, those winters left a mark that never really melted. The reality of those winters. Compared to the mild winters that came before, the 1970s felt like a different planet. In January 1979, temperatures in parts of Scotland hit -20. England dropped to -15. Roads disappeared under drifts higher than car roofs. And in some places, snow lay for 6 weeks straight. The Thames froze along its edges for the first time in decades. Mail didn't just arrive late, sometimes it didn't arrive at all. Public transport barely held together. Trains stalled under iced-up lines, buses were abandoned mid-route, and airports shut down for days. The rail workers' strike in 1978-79 made it worse. So did the power cuts, which hit while pipes were freezing solid inside homes built with little more than brick and hope to keep the heat in. Schools shut not just because of snow, but because the radiators had burst. People queued for paraffin heaters and cold briquettes when they could get them. Supermarket shelves went bare for days because lorries couldn't get through. Even milk froze in the bottles on doorsteps, the foil caps pushed up by ice. You could hear the crunch of frost indoors if you stood still long enough. The odd part is how ordinary it became. Families huddled around single electric fires. Neighbors shared candles when the lights went. It was grim, but it was routine. People still call it proper winter. It was, but it was also exhausting. Weather patterns and the jet stream shift. People like to say the 1970s were just colder back then, that it wasn't climate or science, just thicker jumpers and thinner windows, which isn't true. The decade lined up with a genuine shift in the atmosphere that meteorologists still study today. Basically, the jet stream, that fast river of air looping the northern hemisphere, slumped south and stayed there. When it dips like that, it drags Arctic air straight over Britain and locks it in. Those blocking highs over Scandinavia acted like a lid, stopping the usual westerly winds from bringing in the milder, wetter weather off the Atlantic. The North Atlantic Oscillation went strongly negative several winters in a row. That's rare. It meant weak pressure systems, colder air masses, and long periods of stillness where the frost just sat. Across Europe, snow cover doubled compared to the 1960s. Satellite records from the time show that much of the continent stayed white well into April. There's another layer too. A few minor volcanic eruptions, like Mount Agung's earlier one in '63 and several Icelandic events in the decade, added fine particles to the stratosphere, reflecting sunlight and lowering temperatures slightly. It wasn't dramatic, but enough to tip a marginal winter into a hard one. So yes, people did have worse insulation and fewer gas boilers, but the cold itself was real. It came from above, not nostalgia. The sky quite literally changed shape, and for almost 10 years it refused to shift back. The energy crisis and power cuts. Britain literally ran out of power. In the winter of 1973-74, the oil crisis hit, coal miners went on strike, and the government under Edward Heath declared a 3-day working week to save electricity. Streetlights were switched off, factories stopped mid-shift, television shut down at 10. People cooked dinner by candlelight and went to bed early because there wasn't much else to do. You'd hear the whine of generators in hospitals and the occasional rumble of a neighbour's gas fire, if they were lucky enough to still have fuel left. Shops shortened hours, pubs dimmed the lights. Even the London Underground cut escalators to save current. And all this while temperatures outside were dipping below -10. You'd wake to frost on the inside of the windows and the smell of kerosene from a paraffin heater someone queued hours to buy. It was like the whole country had stepped back a century overnight. The cause was global, but it hit locally. OPEC's oil embargo sent prices skyrocketing. Britain's own energy supply couldn't fill the gap, and striking workers made sure what little fuel there was stayed in the ground. The result wasn't just darkness, it was silence. Radios off, factories idle, trains delayed. It wasn't just the cold, it was that everything stopped working when you needed it most. A country not built for it. You hear people say, "We just got on with it," but that ignores the fact Britain wasn't built to handle winters like those. Most homes still had single glazed windows and thin brick walls that leaked heat faster than you could make it. Central heating was a luxury. Fewer than half of households had it in the early 70s. So families relied on coal fires in one room and hoped the warmth would drift upstairs. It didn't. Bedrooms were freezing, pipes burst, and ice formed on the inside of glass. The government even issued leaflets on how to make do by hanging blankets across doors. The country itself struggled just as much. Councils ran out of grit halfway through the season. Buses were stranded across city centres. Some local authorities borrowed snowplows from nearby airports because their own machinery couldn't cope. Britain had spent the post-war years rebuilding for modernity, not resilience, and it showed. Scandinavian countries, dealing with the same cold air mass, kept running almost normally. Insulated homes, heated bus shelters, snow chains on tyres. The difference wasn't toughness, it was preparation. Britain's optimism after the 60s had skipped the boring part. Building a country that could actually withstand its own weather. Cultural memory. The winter of discontent. The phrase winter of discontent sounds like something out of Shakespeare, which is fitting because it became Britain's shorthand for collapse. A country freezing both literally and politically. In 1978-79, temperatures plunged again, but this time the cold wasn't just outside. There were strikes across almost every sector. Lorry drivers, grave diggers, refuse collectors, hospital staff. Snow blocked roads while rubbish piled high in city centres. Newspapers ran photographs of rats darting between black bags beside half-frozen cars. The image stuck because it captured everything at once. The chaos, the cold, the sense that no one was in charge. It's easy now to think it was all politics, but weather made it worse. Weeks of sub-zero temperatures turned bin lorries to ice sculptures and stopped gravediggers even if they'd wanted to work. The ground was frozen solid. Fuel deliveries stalled, ambulances ran on fumes. Even the press, already sharpening knives for the Labour government, leaned on the cold to tell a bigger story. That Britain itself had frozen in place. That moment shifted the national mood. It set up the narrative Thatcher rode into office on, strength against stagnation, order against entropy. The snow melted, but the phrase never did. And here's the thing most people forget. It wasn't the worst winter on record, just the one that felt like the end of something. Why it stopped. The shift into the 1980s. Winters didn't suddenly stop being cold, they just stopped being that cold. By the early 1980s, the North Atlantic oscillation had flipped into a positive phase, which meant the jet stream pushed milder, wetter air across Britain instead of dragging in Arctic blasts. The difference was dramatic. The kind of snowdrifts that shut down villages a few years earlier were replaced by grey drizzle and half-frozen puddles. People complained it felt miserable, but it wasn't deadly anymore. Heating changed everything too. Gas boilers replaced coal fires. Roof insulation grants spread through council housing. Double glazing went from luxury to standard. You didn't have to thaw your car door with a kettle just to get to work. The same country that once froze under blankets was suddenly built to stay warm. It wasn't all down to human ingenuity. Global temperatures were creeping up, and the late 80s El Niño cycles kept tilting the odds toward mild, wet winters. Meteorologists started calling them Atlantic winters. Less snow, more storms. And here's what's funny, people missed it. The hardship, the frost, the shared grumble. By 1989, snow wasn't a threat, it was nostalgia. Kids built slushy snowmen on school fields, and parents said things like, "You should have seen it in '79, as if the cold itself had become a kind of legend." Legacy. Why those winters still matter. There's a bit of film from January 1979, men shoveling snow off the roof of a double-decker bus in Sheffield. You see it in every documentary about British winters, even when the story isn't really about that year. It's because the image says everything at once. Resilience, absurdity, exhaustion. People remember those winters like a national myth. They call them proper winters, the kind where milk froze in bottles and you could skate on ponds that haven't frozen solid since. Though if you check the records, the 1947 and 1963 freezes were actually worse. The 70s ones just looked colder, all that grainy footage, that half-grey light, the slow grind of life stopping for weeks. They matter because they gave shape to something Britain lost after, the feeling that everyone was stuck in the same struggle. You couldn't buy your way out of it. No one's house was warm enough, no one's car would start, and even the Queen's Christmas message looked chilly that decade. The phrase proper winter doesn't really describe the weather. It describes a mood, that strange mix of complaint and pride that comes from surviving something together. Maybe that's what people miss. The cold was brutal, but the unity felt real.